Davante Adams shaking his head, can't believe it, as the Raiders in a 14-point hole at halftime.
The Raiders were absolutely diddied by the Carolina Panthers at home in front of their own fans. Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce decided to throw players under the bus and coaches. He shielded himself from any blame. This offseason, the head coach preached violence, physicality, ill intent, and pain, but the only pain he has inflicted has been on Raiders fans this season. But hey, at least the head coach smokes cigars and drives a cool car, right? This was the Andy Dalton game. The Carolina Panthers, while traveling to Las Vegas, made the decision to bench their former number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young, and instead go with the veteran quarterback, Andy Dalton. And after this first drive during the game, when Andy Dalton and the Panthers absolutely marched down the field and really put on a clinic against the Raiders getting a touchdown, you knew this was not going to be a normal game. The Raiders were obviously favored in this game because they were riding high off of that victory last week against the Baltimore Ravens. It was an impressive victory against the AFC Championship contender. But after this matchup against the Carolina Panthers, it appears that that victory was complete fool's gold. Okay, the Panthers scored on the opening drive. It's not the end of the world, right? Well, the Raiders offense with playmakers like Davante Adams and Brock Bowers, well, they did absolutely nothing on their first drive of the game. The Raiders are a defensive team. They spent money on Christian Wilkins at the defensive tackle position. Max Crosby is obviously one of the best players on their team. They were supposed to be led by their defense. Antonio Pierce, for all intents and purposes, is a defensive coach, a defensive-minded coach, since he is a former linebacker. Well, the rockstar defense of the Raiders got their ass handed to by Andy Dalton for the majority of the game, not just that opening drive. And when you really look at this game, the score is misleading. It was not even close. And not only that, but Andy Dalton broke a record this season. He technically broke a record this season. He is the only player in the NFL this season with 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in a single game against the Raiders' rockstar defense. Andy Dalton gets that record right there. Number 1, the only one in 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in one game this season. But at one point in the first quarter, there was a sliver of hope for all the Raiders fans who showed out to support the team. The Raiders marched down the field with a long bomb to Trey Tucker from Gardner Minshew, and then they were able to punch it in with the running back Alexander Madison for the touchdown. Hey, could this be a carryover of momentum from last week? Well, little did we know that shit would get shut down real quick. The Carolina Panthers, led by head coach Dave Canales. Head coach Dave Canales, a brand new head coach, offensive-minded head coach who coached Baker Mayfield, helped him revive his career. Also, coach Geno Smith helped him revive his career with the Seattle Seahawks. Was supposed to fix Bryce Young, but instead they decided to go with Andy Dalton. And this guy, little did we all know, we found this out recently, co-wrote a book with his wife talking about his corn addiction. He apparently has had a corn addiction. Well, after this offensive clinic that the Carolina Panthers put on the Raiders tonight, I think he's going to be celebrating with some lotion and laptop. And you saw the Carolina Panthers march down and get their second touchdown of the game. Andy Dalton was connecting with Adam Thielen. Andy Dalton and Adam Thielen for 6. Did you ever think you would hear that in 2024? Well, it happened today. The fire crotch QB was on fire tonight. And at this point, when the Raiders were down 14-7, you can see Antonio Pierce and the Raiders start to get nervous. And that's why it was shocking to see in the Raiders' third offensive drive of the day, Antonio Pierce kind of panicked, man. On 4th and 4, they decided to go for it on 4th down at the Carolina Panthers 39-yard line in the second quarter with 6:56 left. Let me remind you, the Raiders were getting the ball at the top of the third quarter, but you can tell they were getting nervous about Andy Dalton and the Panthers offense, so they decided to go for it on 4th and 4, and of course they did not convert it, and there was a turnover on downs early in the second quarter. Luckily, the defense was able to hold on strong after that. But for most of the game, the offense could not get anything going. 3.7 yards a carry on the ground running the football. They still have no run game. They are literally last in the NFL in run game efficiency. Gardner Minshew, when he wasn't getting pressured, when he did have time, he did nothing with the football. He couldn't make a decision with it. And when he would make decisions, oftentimes it would be a 3-yard passing attempt to Davante Adams. That's that's not going to get it done. But it really wasn't just the offense who lost this game. Like we mentioned earlier, the Raiders defense was getting absolutely smoked, and we all knew this could be a trap game. As soon as the Panthers announced that they were going to go with Andy Dalton, we all thought, all right, the Raiders better settle down. The Raiders better take this team seriously. And it seemed like the Raiders did not take the Panthers seriously, and it was a complete trap game. I wonder who's to blame for that. Is it really all just the players' fault, or is the head coach responsible? Did the head coach overlook Andy Dalton and the Carolina Panthers? Remember, just a few days ago, Antonio Pierce did not even know that Andy Dalton was going to be the starter. The reporters had to tell him this during the press conference, and he was surprised.
Was it facing Andy Dalton?
I don't know what happened there.
He's going to start a quarterback.
Veteran quarterback. I mean, that's news to me. I just was in meetings, but I got to go back up to the drawing boards on that one. Wasn't prepared for that one.
The Raiders got the ball to start in the second half and did nothing. The game started getting out of hand throughout the third quarter, and that is why, with 8:17 to go in the third quarter, the Raiders got really desperate. 24-7 was the score. 8:17 to go. The Raiders, out of nowhere, and I was absolutely surprised they did this. I wasn't surprised necessarily with the decision, but with the play call. So they are on their own 37-yard line. The Raiders are on their own 37-yard line. Gardner Minshew barely gets the Raiders to a 4th and 1 with a scramble. He really just went all out, bailed out on a run, ditched a passing play to get them in a 4th and 1 situation. And on their own 37-yard line, the Raiders decide to go for it on 4th and 1, and they went in hurry-up mode. They didn't even think about this decision, give their offense a little bit of time to get themselves together. They tried to catch the defense off guard, and they went with the QB sneak on 4th and 1 and got absolutely stuffed. Turnover on downs on your own 37-yard line, 24-7. That set up an easy field goal for the Carolina Panthers, literally starting at the Raiders 37 to go up 27-7. And that at that moment, you knew the game was absolutely over. The Raiders are down 20 points. It would be a miracle. I was still rooting, and I was still trying to say, hey, even though I'm not totally sold on the front office, on the coaching staff of this team, I am sold on the players. I'm just not sold on the coaching staff of this team, and I have not been since the offseason. I still thought, hey, there is no way the Raiders are going to lose to the Panthers at home. There is still a chance in the third quarter. You got 3 possessions left. And so, hey, I was rooting for the Raiders to come back, make something happen, rooting for Gardner Minshew to build that connection with Davante Adams, and it looked like it could happen. Maybe the Raiders could get something going. But then Gardner Minshew threw a boneheaded pass. Him and Davante Adams were not on the same page. I don't know if it was Adams' fault. I don't know if it was Gardner Minshew's fault. They looked like they were both running 2 different plays. And then you had an interception towards the top of the fourth quarter, and that is when you knew for sure the game was absolutely over. There was going to be no miracle at all whatsoever. At moments during this game, Antonio Pierce looked pissed off, and at a certain point, he just looked deflated. He looked like he had no emotional response. He looked helpless at a certain point. We all know Antonio Pierce is a rookie head coach who has never been a coordinator at the NFL level and has also only been a linebacker coach at the NFL level for about 1.5 years until he took over as interim head coach. He really does have some of the least experience in the entire NFL as a head coach, and we're going to go over some comments that you guys said to me in this past offseason when I was critical of the hiring of Antonio Pierce. But he looked uncomfortable throughout this game, and he brought in Marvin Lewis, the former Cincinnati Bengals head coach, to help him out. So you thought Marvin Lewis would be helping out Antonio Pierce during this game, especially considering the fact that Marvin Lewis knows Andy Dalton really well. He actually had Andy Dalton as his quarterback for many years. You would think Marvin Lewis could give Antonio Pierce some intel, some tips, something to not only help him manage football games, since he's been a head coach for several years and he's the assistant head coach right now, but also to stop Andy Dalton, his former quarterback. If Marvin Lewis can't even do that, how the hell is he going to help Antonio Pierce do anything? And this is the big moment after the game. Antonio Pierce not able, in my opinion, to hold back his emotions. I understand it. I'm an emotional guy. I'm a passionate guy. But as a head coach, when it's barely week 3 in the season, and we know this is a shitty loss, embarrassing loss, consequential loss, Raiders literally got their cheeks clapped by the worst team in the NFL. It's a big freaking deal. But as a head coach, you got to stay stoic. You got to stay strong. You got to understand it's a long season. And what he said right here, I think is going a little too far week 3 into the regular season. Antonio Pierce said he believes certain players made business decisions rather than going all out.
I don't think it was a team. I think there was definitely some individuals that made business decisions, and will make business decisions going forward as well.
Antonio.
And as you can hear in the end of that comment, not only did he say that people made business decisions, but that the Raiders would be making business decisions based on that. So the Raiders lose the 3rd game of the regular season, and we're criticizing players for not going all out when we're getting our ass whooped, 33-15 by late in the 4th quarter. So we're going to be criticizing players for not going all out in that moment and making business decisions. And really, even if players are making business decisions, even if he saw some people take some plays off late in the game, wouldn't you want to keep that behind closed doors? Wouldn't you want to put a lid on the drama? I think that's what a lot of experienced head coaches would do. I think you would understand it's early in the season. Why stir the pot at all and make threats saying that you're going to have some transactions based on this? You're going to bench players, trade players. We're going to break down who we believe he was talking about. Now, of course, the whole entire media world is talking about Pierce's comments about business decisions. And Davante Adams was asked about this comment. Here's what he had to say.
I'll tell you, Antonio said that he thought some players made business decisions in the game today. Did you notice that at all when you watching?
In relation to what? Like as far
in terms of like effort level towards the end of the game after it kind of got out of hand.
I don't know. I feel like I don't know. It's tough for me to identify that. I'm not sure.
Obviously, Davante Adams isn't going to say much. He felt a little confused and a little awkward responding to that. A lot of people have speculated, hey, was Antonio Pierce talking about Davante Adams? He played well into the 4th quarter, even when the Raiders brought in Aiden O'Connell. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, I don't know what the future holds for Davante Adams. We showed you that clip at halftime at the beginning of this video. Obviously, he's not happy with what's going on right now, but he is claimed to be committed to the Raiders. What else is he supposed to say, though? Is he really going to say anything else? He's claimed to be committed to the Raiders, so we'll see what happens. Maybe the Raiders make a decision at the trade deadline. Look, if the Raiders aren't going to be competitive this year, which it seems like it's going to be hard to bounce back from this, we'll talk about the future schedule in a little bit. Maybe you just go ahead and trade Davante Adams when he has the highest trade value he's going to have right now. It's not going to be that high this upcoming offseason. Definitely not going to be that high next year. Plus, he has an inflated contract. The Raiders need to make a decision on that anyways by the end of the year. Keep in mind, Davante Adams has made some IG posts. Now, we don't know what to make of this. People often say, you're looking for too much, but randomly made a post. People said it was maybe about his helmet, but it's just a story where it says maybe ... And it's Davante Adams at practice. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe Davante Adams could join another team. Who knows? There are some people and some Raiders fans talking trash on Davante Adams, saying, screw him, we don't need him, he had too many drops. I don't think he had that bad of a game. I think he gets a lot of bad passes thrown at him. I think he's still one of the best wide receivers in the league. But if those Raiders fans want to blame Davante Adams, go ahead and blame Davante Adams, say get him off the team, he's trash, then yeah, go ahead and let him go. Go ahead and let Davante Adams go to another team, and let's see if he's the problem with the Raiders right now. Go ahead and let Davante Adams join the Saints, maybe link up with Derek Carr, and let's see if he is the problem with the Raiders right now. I think we're going to find out over time. He's pretty much our main asset. So Antonio Pierce said players were taking plays off. He also doesn't seem too happy about his quarterback play. By the way, he had a quarterback competition during the preseason, during training camp, and he said Gardner Minshew won the job. Now, I actually do agree that Gardner Minshew is the better quarterback, better than the backup Aiden O'Connell. I've been saying the whole time the Raiders are paying Gardner Minshew $15 million to be the starter, and the offensive line is part of the problem with the Raiders. I don't think the statue in the pocket, Aiden O'Connell, is going to make them much better. And Aiden O'Connell came in during this game. He took a sack, but also had a touchdown. Keep in mind, this was garbage time. Panthers defense is pretty much playing prevent defense. They're giving up big plays, and he still took a sack and nearly threw a pick in his only drive of the game. Antonio Pierce was asked about bringing in Aiden O'Connell to play for Gardner Minshew, and Antonio Pierce said that the game was out of hand. Two quarterbacks battled, so let's see the other guy go in there and see what he can do just for a little bit. This is what I see happening as things get out of hand, as Antonio Pierce is sort of pointing fingers of the problems around him, not necessarily internally. I think the first finger is going to be pointed at the quarterback, and this is what's going to happen. If the Raiders continue to struggle, especially next week against the Cleveland Browns, I can see them making a quarterback change for Aiden O'Connell, give some fans a little bit of hope so they continue to go and buy some tickets at Allegiant Stadium thinking, oh, maybe Aiden O'Connell will be the answer and save the entire season. Do I think he will? No. Do I think they'll make this move to give some optimism? Of course. Why not? Try it. But the main guy who I think Antonio Pierce low-key threw under the bus was the offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy. And I do think if you're going to blame coaching on anything, it is Luke Getsy. He has had some horrible play calls. He was brought in because of his running game with the Chicago Bears, and it's been inefficient. The blocking, and also some of the conservative play calling. I'm seeing the Raiders try to fight back and get back in this game, and I'm seeing 2 runs up the middle for close to no gain. Pierce, the head coach, has suggested that the Raiders need to do something about their offensive scheme, but it's still this whole habit of just pointing fingers at the offensive preparation throughout the week. And yes, that is on the offensive coordinator, but who is the guy at the top? Who is the guy at the very top of the tree? It is Antonio Pierce. Yes, you can point the blame at the offensive coordinator's strategy, but at the same time, you're the head coach. Don't you have any input? Aren't you also preparing this team for these upcoming games? Can you not intervene? Give your own suggestions and directions. And if you can't, then what are you really doing there? And what is the head coach of the Raiders team currently even in charge of? We know Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, a highly touted defensive coordinator, runs the defense right now for the Raiders. And towards the end of last season, when the defense started hitting their stride when Antonio Pierce took over as interim head coach, Antonio Pierce, I believe, kind of accepted all the credit for the success of Patrick Graham and that defense last year, despite the fact that it's Graham running the defense. So he can accept the credit for the defense when they're doing well, but cannot accept the struggles of the offense when the offense is struggling in the first part of this 2024 season. Keep in mind, Luke Getsy was technically chosen by Antonio Pierce to be the offensive coordinator after Cliff Kingsbury turned down the job and decided to go with the Washington Commanders instead. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the Raiders, oftentimes I am prescient. I warned about the hiring of Antonio Pierce in January of 2024, and I got a lot of flack from people in the comments, people calling me a fake fan and a hater. We'll go through a little bit of it today, but January 2024, the Raiders are making a huge mistake on them potentially hiring somebody like Antonio Pierce. Keep in mind, this guy does not have much experience at all at the NFL level in terms of coaching. He was a player, but in terms of coaching, not much experience at all. And the Raiders did not even interview any other candidates. They decided to go all in on Antonio Pierce because the fans chanted AP, AP at Allegiant Stadium, and because Max Crosby and the players said that they love Antonio Pierce and he's got to be the head coach for sure, they're going to be upset. And I warned about this lack of experience. You have some people joking around saying, I just want John Gruden back. I think a lot of fans would be stoked with having John Gruden right now over whatever this is. People said I was wrong. He beat the Chiefs and literally had our defense looking great. Even though Patrick Graham runs the defense, he gets credit for the defense last year. Some people saying I'm wrong. AP gave the Raiders their identity back, and I think this is really the crux of it. People fell for the Air Force Ones, him driving a lowrider, him smoking his cigars. They forgot the substance, and they got attracted to the dressing and the superficial aspect of Antonio Pierce, his brand. And really, I got the most shade when I covered Antonio Pierce's bankruptcy filing that happened in the summer. This is when I got the most shade and pushback by a lot of Raiders fans just because I was pointing out the facts here. Not only does he have this bankruptcy filing, but how much of a distraction is this just going to be when you're trying to be a head coach? You already have a steep hill to climb because you're in a tough division, one of the least experienced head coaches in that division, and now you got this drama in the background. That would affect anybody, not just Antonio Pierce. And I was basically saying around this time in June that the Raiders shouldn't have hired the guy. already has experience problems. Now you got this drama in the background. It would be a liability for any company. I'm surprised that he was still able to move past this. And I had people saying I always have something against the coach, go to another team, you sit here and try to make him look bad. And some people are saying that I'm not a real Raiders fan. Wi-Fi Willie ain't a real fan because he criticizes Antonio Pierce. And now all over the internet, you have those same fans who are saying negative stuff about Wi-Fi Willie now screaming fire AP. And look, I was never rooting for this guy to fail. I was rooting for him deep in the fourth quarter in this freaking embarrassing loss against the Carolina Panthers. But the facts are the facts. He's always been in over his head for this job. I think it would be more reasonable for him to be a coordinator first before taking over as a head coach of a really valuable organization, which is the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think he was able to ride the high of the interim bump after the disaster of Josh McDaniels. I think anybody could have been the head coach after Josh McDaniels, and they would have had a good interim bump. He was such a disaster. And AP with his style, the cigars, the lowrider, he's a little braggadocious, and I don't know if that's a good way to go in the NFL as a head coach when things are so up and down, and you could really be moved by passion and emotion. And I think you saw him in this press conference get a little too emotional and call out certain players, saying the Raiders are going to make business decisions. What are you saying here? Are we going to really let this guy trade away some of the Raiders' valuable players? I know that the GM Tom Telesco is involved in that, but him making these comments about players, I think does not bode well for this season long term. And Antonio Pierce seemed to keep it together after the Raiders defeated the Baltimore Ravens last week. And like I mentioned earlier, I did want to celebrate that win as a Raiders fan. I felt happy for the players on that team who've been through a lot. But if we're going to keep it 100% real, the Raiders offense in particular played like complete shit for 3/4 of that game and finally showed up a little bit in the fourth quarter. And I feel like the Raiders luckily won that game. I felt like they luckily beat the Baltimore Ravens, and it was more so the Ravens having some self-inflicted wounds, whether it be a bad punt, bad challenge play, or penalties or busted coverages. So I just wonder, just like Antonio Pierce last year said that he had the recipe to beat the Chiefs after they beat Mahomes last year, did he get just a little too cocky, just a little too confident after the Raiders beat the Baltimore Ravens last week, and then you get your ass whooped by the Carolina Panthers because you think you got it in the bag when you really don't? Look, despite the fact that I am not sold on Antonio Pierce, I still want this season to turn around. I want him to turn it around. I want him to prove all the haters wrong, including myself, who are doubting him right now. But this schedule does not look good for the Raiders. The Carolina Panthers were supposed to be an easy victory for the Raiders. Now you're facing the Cleveland Browns at home. At least you're at home, but if you had trouble against the Carolina Panthers, the Cleveland Browns are not going to be a walk in the park. They got a good run game. They got a good defense. Deshaun Watson, even though he's been dealing with his massage issues and all that drama in the background, still could make some plays with his legs. And I just hope that Deshaun Watson isn't going to end up getting a glute massage by the Raiders defense by the end of the night and isn't going to look like Andy Dalton looked like tonight in Allegiant Stadium. And then after that, you're playing the Denver Broncos, who I thought were going to be a walk in the park for the Raiders. But the Broncos just blew out the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield, one of the hottest teams earlier in the season. We're going to be traveling on the road to face the Broncos. That's not going to be a walk in the park at all. The Pittsburgh Steelers are undefeated right now. They just beat the Chargers, who beat the Raiders in week 1. Then we're going to play them at home. Then you got the LA Rams, who just beat the Niners. Granted, it is a Niners team without Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. And then you got the Chiefs and the Bengals. Bro, these next 6 games look really tough for the Raiders. They really needed this win for the Carolina Panthers. I think a win against Cleveland could give them some more hope, but if they lose against Cleveland, I think it's going to start stacking and looking ugly. My name is Wi-Fi Willie. Subscribe for more content from me. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.